What's going on, YouTube? We're back at it for another video. Today we're going to be talking about the best stratagems and support weapons for that of crowd control, as with this recent patch we have found ourselves in a situation where there are less chargers and bile titans almost by a very dramatic amount, especially on Helldive difficulty. I was sad to come in with an EAT 17 for the first few matches and only find myself coming across one or two chargers just to one-shot with that EAT 17. But what they've replaced with what they've taken away is a bunch of trash mobs. We've got more of those hunters out there, those little grasshoppers coming and flying straight in your face, trying to get a couple of those one-shots by just nailing you in the face, or sometimes if you do just dodge away with the mass number of them, they will just all dogpile on top of you, and you won't be able to get up out of that prone position, and they will just eat you alive on the ground. There is nothing more frustrating than that nightmarish moment. But on top of that, the bloaty bugs, the ones that are armored, the ones that are orange, those little pukers are going to be coming in larger numbers, as well as any of those other smaller enemy types that can be extremely frustrating to deal with in larger numbers. But with some of these stratagems and these support weapons, we'll be able to clear through those crowds and make way for our team to get to that next objective and complete that mission. But on that note, let's get straight into it. Now, when it comes to our first option, is actually going to be up to a personal preference point when it comes to two different weapons between the machine gun and the stalwart. Now, when it comes down to the machine gun, this one is going to have medium armor penetration with a bit more when it comes to the damage output per round from this weapon, at the trade-off of sadly having a further increased amount of recoil on top of having to take a knee in order to actually fit in another one of these box magazines when it comes to reloading. This can take quite a bit of time, and it can mean the difference between you getting overrun or your team getting overrun, and sometimes can full on create instances where this almost feels useless in certain moments where you're just constantly running and having to use your primary or stratagems in order to clear out some of those crowds, rather than having the capability of being able to just dish out a high amount of that lead. But if the recoil is too much for you, you can hold the reload button, whatever it is, on your controller or on your mouse and keyboard, and be able to change up the rate of fire to diminish some of that recoil and diminish the rate at which you may expend that ammunition from that box magazine, as there is not too many rounds inside of that and you can burn through it fairly quickly. And when it comes to the stalwart, this is my personal preference, especially considering I will be using this weapon for something that is just clearing out those little hunters, those little grasshoppers. That is the main objective for this, and a lot of times I won't find myself utilizing this against medium armored enemies. And with the stalwart, you can further increase the overall output. It will have easier to control recoil on top of the best part of it, the simple fact that you can reload while moving, while running, and not having to worry about whether or not you need to take a knee or have enough spacing between that of you and your enemy before you can get those next rounds off. This way you can keep trucking with the team, pushing back and being able to hold back those enemies as quickly as possible, instead of possibly taking that chance on getting that next box magazine in and then being able to take out that enemy, or finding yourself in that situation where you're fumbling that box and they're just overrunning you. It's going to be up to your personal preference which one feels better for you, but for me personally, it's going to be all about that stall. Coming up next, personal favorite of mine is going to be the grenade launcher. Now, this one is going to be a devastating force. Obviously, having that explosive damage is going to be extremely beneficial when it comes to facing off with something like the bloaty bugs. Those are going to be the most nightmarish creature to deal with, especially when you have massive amounts of packs of these. They can just start puking off in any direction, and even when you dodge, if they just happen to touch you by the toenail with some of that puke, it will be something that can one-shot you, and there is nothing more frustrating than that moment. But in instances where you find packs of these, the grenade launcher will be able to clear them out with the quickness. Even in some instances, being able to take out 4 to 5 of them with just 3 grenades from this launcher. As long as they're clustered right next to each other, the blast radius from this will take out that pack of them all clustered together. Now, that is one of the weaknesses to the grenade launcher, is the simple fact that if you have a bunch of enemies that are evenly dispersed, it will not be as effective, as the blast radius is only so far and it isn't exactly the largest. But if you can get some of your teammates to kite some of those enemies and pull them all together, or if you can even get yourself to kite some of them and possibly throw on something like a jump pack and be able to get ahead of them or up to some high ground, have them all clustered together, you will eviscerate some of these packs of enemies extremely quickly. And on top of that, if you are facing off with the charger, as long as you're shooting at the ground at the back end of them, or just hitting that weak spot on the rear end of that charger, you will actually be able to take them out fairly quickly, sometimes within less than 1 magazine. And one thing to also keep in mind is that this will need an arming time, so if you do end up finding yourself in a situation where you start to notice that something is too close to you, be mindful that this will ricochet off them or bounce off their face, and then can possibly bounce into your face and then then blow up. It is extremely frustrating, so do keep in mind that you need a little bit of a medium distance in order for this to effectively work for you. Coming up next, we've got the arc thrower, which is going to be fantastic at clearing up some of those trash mobs, but at that same time, it can be problematic for you for more than a few situations. One of the biggest problems I have with the arc thrower is inconsistency. Not only is it one of those weapons that not always is going to deal the same amount of damage between each charge of it, but at that same time, it will not always arc through every enemy or even arc all the way to the targets you're looking for. Sometimes this can mean that you find yourself in a situation where you're serving up well done cooked Helldivers to those bugs, and you're going to be burning through those reinforcements of your teammates. It can be quick and devastating towards smaller trash mobs, and sometimes can be even more devastating when it comes to facing off with medium type enemies. But one of the biggest things that I find to be a problem is a lot of people try to focus this as something that can deal damage, if not be the end-all be-all destroyer of chargers and bile titans. This can be something that can deal damage to them, but it is not the main focus. And utilizing this weapon should be focused towards being able to corral those crowds and just eliminate as many of the smaller trash mobs as you can. One thing that I found to be problematic though is this wasn't the perfect weapon to taking out some of those hunters if you didn't have some distance between you and them. The second they were able to fly over to you, it seems as though the charge from this weapon would not arc to that enemy in front of me. It would go past them and towards the targets that are further away from me, ending up in a situation where I would constantly need to be switching to my primary in order to take out some of those enemies that had gone up into my face. And when you've got multiple of those hunter in your face, it can be extremely problematic. So this is something to keep in mind. You do want to be mindful of making sure that you are constantly keeping enemies at a medium distance. And sometimes you may be in a best bet situation of throwing on a jump pack with this, getting to some higher ground. That way you can alleviate those situations where you may find yourself between your teammates and the enemy, if not giving you a stronger capability of getting a lay of the land and being able to arc at your leisure without having things get too close to you, and having that clear line of sight for that arc to make it over to those enemies, as anything like shrubbery, rocks, or dead bodies of some of those bugs can stop you from having that arc connect to that next enemy. And do keep in mind when it comes to being able to get quick efficiency out of this weapon after that first full charge, or even just half charging, this is one of those things that you can utilize to quickly get more of those arcs out and dealing more damage with this weapon. And as far as I've seen, full charge isn't going to do a whole lot other than just stopping you from just free-willingly throwing this out and possibly cooking up some of your teammates for those bugs tonight at dinner. They're very hungry and they're waiting for you to arc it straight through that buddy of yours, but we're not serving up Helldivers. We're serving up well-cooked Terminid. Now, speaking of well-cooked Terminid, we also have the Flamethrower. This is going to be an excellent option that is capable of taking down chargers extremely quickly. Now, when it comes to facing down with chargers, I will still highly suggest aiming for the kneecaps, the legs, specifically as you're looking to hit that weak spot on the inside of the leg with this flame. It is something that you will be able to do from the outside of the leg, as it will burn straight through the armor and hit that weak spot directly. Now, some people have said that this may be something that can kill quicker based on the simple fact that supposedly the health of the head of the charger is diminished, but I believe the actual penetration protection of the armor is what's been diminished and not the overall health of the head. But I could be wrong, so this is one that do let me know down in the comments whether or not aiming for the head is going to be the better choice when it comes to utilizing the flamethrower. But when it comes to facing off with small to medium type bug enemies, this can be extremely devastating towards them, but it will not be an instant killer. And that's one of the drawbacks when it comes to utilizing the flamethrower as a crowd control weapon, as with the hunters, they will be able to jump past this and you will have a similar effect that you had with that of the arc thrower, where once things are inside of your face, you will sometimes need to immediately switch over to that primary weapon. Otherwise, you may find yourself in a situation where not only will you be finding yourself in a situation where you're serving up charbroiled Terminid, but you may end up cooking yourself at the same time. Now, that's going to be it for the support weapons. Let's get on to some of these stratagems that can be excellent for crowd control as well. Coming up first, we've got the Orbital Gatling Barrage, which is going to come in handy in more than a few situations and is going to be excellent if you can nail down where that bug breach location is. As soon as you see some of that orange smoke, if you drop this just a second or two just after that pops up, you'll be able to take out a good bit of those smaller enemies, as well as being capable of stun locking some of those chargers as soon as they come out of that, up until this barrage is over, which this will be readily available just about every minute and a half, and will come in handy in more than a few situations, considering it does have a wide radius to it and it is explosive damage. So any of those weak spots that may get hit by this, as well as being able to close up some of those bug holes, this is going to come in handy in more than a few situations, not only in the fact of just being able to crowd control some of those smaller enemies and diminish some of those crowds that are coming up behind you, but at the same time being able to lock down some of those bug breaches. Coming up right after that, we've got the Orbital AIRBURST strike, which is going to be a powerful tool for locking down some of those bug breaches, but can be devastating to you and your team if you're too close to this. Now, when it comes to the video preview inside of the ship, when it comes to looking at this stratagem, it does not do it justice with how much of a wide radius this does have and how sporadic it can be, as it will dance around that marker and some of those shrapnel will go flying off in multiple directions in a large circular radius around wherever you've marked this. I would highly suggest throwing this a good distance away from yourself and your teammates, as it can be absolutely a one-shotter to anybody that's caught within its field. But that being said, it is excellent at being able to quickly take out some of those massive packs, especially if you've got a large group of them tailing behind you. This is something that can start churning through those crowds as they push forward to you, and on top of that, it will strike 3 times, so it will not just be a one and done and then it is another 2 minutes later. That is one of the biggest drawbacks to this stratagem, is the fact that you will have to wait 2 minutes. But if you're looking for something that's going to quickly take out large crowds of those smaller enemies, this is going to be something that will blow through those crowds very easily and give you the capability of locking down some of those bug breaches. Coming up right after that, we've got the Eagle Cluster Bomb, which is going to be extremely detrimental to your team if you don't know how to use this. If you don't throw this a good distance away from yourself and your team, as this will have a massive radius of effect with a multitude of explosives, and it will churn through those smaller bugs, but it will also churn through those reinforcements. I can't tell you how many times I've actually died to this on so many different occasions, but it is something that can be excellent at crowd control. Definitely one I would say is a top pick for locking down some of those bug breaches, and you will get 5 uses with this. It will clear multitudes of crowds, including having the capability of obliterating those bloaty bugs out there. Those little pukers won't know what's coming in. They will be in pieces by the time this is already struck. But do be mindful where you throw this and make sure that it is away from yourself and the team. Now, coming up last is my favorite for the crowd control stratagems, and that's going to be the Patriot Exosuit. Not exactly the most useful for crowd control, in the means that you only get 2 uses out of this, but when you do have it available, and if you have multiple people with this mech on the Terminid side of things, it is going to come in handy in so many different situations, especially when it comes to being able to wrangle massive amounts of bugs that come out of bug breaches. If you possibly run into multiple patrols, you've got multitude of chargers, a ton of those smaller enemies, this will be able to clear through those crowds with extreme efficiency. As long as you know how to use it and you know how to shoot, as well as not wasting all those rounds in every moment of turn. But just having 2 people with this stratagem can mean the difference between having some of those moments where overwhelming odds may have just churned through all of your reinforcements and giving you the capability of overpowering those moments and pushing on to clear those crowds and make the rest of the mission a smooth run. You really can't go wrong with this one. If you haven't made it to 25, this is definitely worth the grind, and I would highly suggest throwing this one in. Honestly, at this point, when it comes to facing off with the Terminid, having at least 1 person with this stratagem, if 2 of them on the team, is always going to be a huge benefit to the overall success rate of any mission that you go on. But that's going to be it right there, people. We've got all of the best stratagems and support weapons when it comes to facing off with some of these Terminid and gaining that crowd control capability. Now, hopefully this has helped you out, and I will be making a best crowd control loadout here in the coming future. So if you'd like to see some content like that or more content like this, hit that subscribe button. And if you'd like to see some of this content live, hit that link down in the description below. Follow me over at Twitch. We will be live streaming that brand new war bond in the coming morning for tomorrow. So if you haven't already followed that up, be ready for that. We'll be jumping on there at somewhere between 4 and 6 a.m. whenever this drops in, and then be able to just go straight into that war bond and start trying out some of those new weapons. But let me know down in the comments below how you're feeling about this patch, how you're feeling about what the enemy density is with these smaller mobs now, and whether or not you feel a little bit alleviated at the fact that there's less chargers or less Bile Titans. In some instances, I have found where the chargers and Bile Titans have had surge spikes of spawning that seem almost like that of the previous version before the patch, but it's hit or miss now, and it sometimes can feel as though I'm only facing off with 1 to 2 chargers and 1 to 2 Bile Titans. little bit confusing, sometimes a little bit too easy, but that's my personal opinion. How are you feeling about it? But on that note, guys, have a good one.